A pleasure to have you here today. Let me hop myself onto the spotlight. Welcome to the MEA Fireside Chat. My name is Carrie Cardinelli. I am your MC to kick things off for today. Wow, we had about 1,500 of you register for today's live event. Before I bring everybody up on stage, just want to see who is here. So if you could pop down into the chat where you are in the world. Tell us where you are. And while you're doing that, make sure your microphone is on mute. This is a live Zoom meeting. So you'll have a chance to ask some questions in the back half of this call. And I love seeing everyone who's here from all, oh my gosh, we've got Europeans here, Japan is here, all of the United States is here, Switzerland is here. Amazing. Be part of this global community. If you are new to our MEA style fireside chats, welcome. It's meant to be a casual, unplugged conversation. And so I'm really excited. I'm going to be introducing Chip in a moment, as well as Jerry Colonna and Herminia, Ibarra, and you'll get a chance to hear from them a little bit about their background, about the work that they do, and they both are teaching at our different campuses. So I'm going to just bring up Chip first to the spotlight. Chip is in the middle of teaching right now at our brand spanking new Santa Fe campus and took time out of his lunch hour to be here today. Thank you, Chip.
I do. Speaking of lunch hour, I do have lunch here. But I promise I will not ask questions with my mouth full. Thank you, Carrie. It's great to be here. I love our new campus, and really honored to have a beautiful workshop here and a Blue Zones workshop down in at our Baja campus this week. So we have two workshops happening simultaneously. But why don't we go ahead and you introduce both of our panelists, and I know that I'm going to speak to Jerry first. And then speak to Herminia second, and then we'll have both of them together. And then we'll open it up for Q&A with the audience.
That sounds perfect. So let me get some things off my screen here. Jerry Colonna is the CEO and founder of Reboot.io, an executive coaching and leadership development firm dedicated to the notion that better humans make better leaders. His unique blend of Buddhism, Jungian therapy, and entrepreneurial know-how make him a sought-after coach and leader. He's an amazing thinker and known to make the biggest leaders in the world cry. So very excited for his talent and coaching skills. And Herminia, I'm so sorry, get that correct. Herminia Ibarra is a professor of organizational behavior at London Business School, here very late in the evening. Thank you for doing that. She served on the Harvard Business School faculty and authority on leadership and career development. Thinkers 50 ranks her among the top management thinkers in the world. A native of Cuba, she received her MEA and PhD from Yale, which is right where I am right now in Connecticut. So thank you both. Both of you are teaching with Chip, which is a really special opportunity for all of you to be able to have an option to spend time with Chip and these incredible thinkers. We are going to start in order of when these are appearing. So Jerry and Chip are going to be teaching September 29th to October 4th for their Reboot Leadership and the Art of Growing Up week. And then Chip and Herminia will be teaching November 4th to 9th in Baja on working identity, unconventional strategies for reinventing your career. Wow. So let's start with Jerry and Chip. We will both hop off the stage, and then everyone will have a chance for some questions in about 30 minutes.
Beautiful. Hey, Jerry.
Hey, Chip. It's wonderful seeing you again.
Yeah. So Jerry's been one of those people. Jerry and I met at Airbnb, and he's one of those people that I really appreciate in the world, because he's both a thinker, author, and also a practitioner. So why don't, Jerry, give us a little bit of your background to start with in terms of how you have come to build your applied wisdom based upon being a practitioner out there in the workplace.
Well, sure. And first, thanks for having me. It's really a delight to be with everybody today. I
And
guess
happy Juneteenth. Happy Juneteenth to everybody. So
happy Juneteenth.
yeah.
Just acknowledge that it feels especially important in this year.
Yep.
I think the best way to understand my background is I haven't been able to hold a job successfully for now. I actually was thinking about that in relation to our topic today, and that I have been in sequence a journalist, a teacher at a small university system, CUNY, City University of New York, that was tongue in cheek, a venture capitalist, a coach, and now an author and coach and a CEO. I've been a board member of many, many organizations, and I was for 6 years the chair of the board at Naropa University here in Boulder. And so I think the best way to understand what I do is that I try to bring all of that experience into every single engagement, into what I do today. And that's both in my writing and in my work with individual clients.
So I love both your recent book, your newest book, which would be great for you to talk about, but particularly I love your book Reboot, because it helps people to understand what it means to be in transition, and that just because you've hit whatever landmark age it is doesn't mean it's all downhill from there. Talk a little bit about that book, because that's going to be our workshop that we're going to be teaching together is about the art of growing up and leadership, and the art of growing up. And the title is Reboot. And we'll be doing this in Santa Fe. So just talk a little bit about that book, if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all. I love talking about my books. The best way I think to understand Reboot is I really tried to understand an essential question. What is it that I believe to be true about leadership? What is it that I believe to be true about what is happening when people gather together and follow someone? And the simplistic answer to that was that better humans make better leaders. Okay, pause. That's a pretty obvious statement, Jerry. And I often joke that it's a pretty obvious statement. But I will often add that what makes that, even though it's obvious, why is it that we have such terrible leadership in the world? Whether it's political leadership or business leadership, and business is the realm in which I mostly operate. And I think it's simply this. The process of becoming a better human, or in the language of the book, a fully grown adult, is really, really hard. Much harder than advertised. Much harder than we are given credit for. And that difficult process requires what I often refer to as radical self-inquiry. This process of stripping away the delusions that we carry about ourselves and about the world in order for us to see ourselves more clearly. See ourselves first and see others more clearly. And in a sense, it's that phrase, radical self-inquiry, that I think sets Reboot apart. Because what I'm encouraging people to do is look at questions, and you know my famous question, how have I been complicit in creating the conditions in my life I say I don't want? And I'll add one tiny bit on this.
Hey, let's make sure that gets in the chat. Say that one more time.
How have I been complicit in creating the conditions in my life that I say I don't want? Now, you know, the businessman in me wishes I had trademarked that question because it flies around the internet all over the place. Jokes aside, I think that question resonates with people for two reasons. One, the initial impulse tends to be that people hear it as, how have I been responsible for creating the conditions in my life. And that's not the word I used. I used the word complicit to imply being an accomplice in creating your own life. Meaning you drive the getaway car, you don't stick up the bank teller. And that's a really important distinction because it releases you from the guilt-producing sense of responsibility, but puts you back in the agency seat of saying, wait, if I've been complicit, then I can take the effort, I can make the effort to reframe my life and do something different. Life doesn't have to happen to me. Probably the most important lesson I ever learned in my transitions. I can make choices about my life.
Wow. How, why is it that so many leaders live in a world of delusion? And what are some of the delusions you had to give up over the course of your growing up?
Well, the most famous delusion was that money was going to create safety for me. See, in Reboot, I talk about the fact that we are organized for the pursuit of love, safety, and belonging. And of those three, safety trumps everything. I need to feel physically, emotionally, spiritually, existentially safe in order to do anything else.
And psychological safety is the number one
And psychological safety is
determinant of effective teams. Keep talking.
That's right. And for me, I grew up with an enormous amount of violence at home. I grew up with a mentally ill mother. I grew up with fathers whose reaction, and I tell this story in Reunion, my second book, whose reaction to understanding that he was adopted was a lifelong battle of depression and alcoholism. And the result was just a terribly violent and unsafe household. Lots of love, lots of violence, very confusing. And I associated my grandparents, my mother's parents, with safety. And I associated with them, my grandfather, Dominic Guido, an Italian immigrant, used to keep a tin of lemon drops in a pantry outside of his kitchen. And they always seemed to have enough. And the result was that lemon drops for me became symbolic of having enough. And in the conflation that we do in adulthood, the pursuit of money in my career as a venture capitalist was a pursuit of safety. And the irony was the more I pursued that, the deeper my depression got. And the deeper my depression, the more unsafe I ended up being. Truly unsafe.
And is this what took you to becoming a coach, one of the best known leadership coaches, executive coaches in the world?
Yeah, there was a moment. There was an interstitial, if you will, a moment of pause, and it was through Buddhism that I stopped. And I'm from Brooklyn, so I hope I won't offend anybody if I get a little salty in my language. But the story of the Buddha wandering, leaving his home as a prince and going out into the world at large and trying to find an answer to the question of birth, old age, sickness, and death is well known. And as the story goes, he, after becoming a powerful mendicant, he still was unsatisfied. And the way I like to say it is he said, fuck it, one day, I'm just going to sit under this tree, the Bodhi tree, until I figure it out. I like to see him in that light because that's what I felt like I did. I just walked away from everything. Freaked out my family, sat under the equivalent of the Bodhi tree at home, started writing a novel about a man in midlife crisis because guess what? And it was through the sitting practice, through developing calluses on my butt of sitting with the discomfort of uncertainty and the discomfort of not knowing who I am and where I was going and what's going to happen, that I ended up first reading, then training to become, and then eventually taking on the practice. So yes, that process led to who I am today. And I'll say this, thank goodness,
Yeah.
because I love the man I am today.
Wow. Yeah, every time just so everybody knows, every time I talk to Jerry, I think of him as sort of an enlightened witness for me, because I learn from him, he learns from me, and we hopefully are both better off for it. Last question for you before we go to Herminia. Oops. Did we lose it? Okay, we're still there. Last question is, you have your newest book's called Reunion.
Right.
And it's about belonging, leadership and belonging. Can you help us to understand that a little bit more?
Sure.
You know,
So that first question that I was talking about before, complicity. How have I been complicit in creating the conditions I say I don't want? That is a radical self-inquiry question. It's a question for looking inward to really finding the agency and the capacity in your own life. With Reunion, I look to a different question. I look to the world at large. And what I see is a world that is immensely divided and really feels like we're at each other's throats. And I have 3 amazing humans as children, including my daughter, Emma, who is 31. And she is fond of rolling her eyes at her father, and especially when he talks about, oh, better humans make better leaders, blah, blah, blah. And what she says is, yeah, Dad, it's not enough to be an ally. You have to be a co-conspirator. And what she's really pointing to is a deep question, which is, what is the responsibility of those of us who hold power? And as a white, cisgender, straight man in America in 2024, I have a tremendous amount of power. What is my responsibility in a world where we seem to be at each other's throats? And it feels to me that answering the longing to belong that is so implicit in this human species may be the pathway to our responsibility. So on the complicity question, how have I been complicit in and benefited from the conditions in the world that I say I don't want to see? And what am I willing to do about it to make the world safe for you or for this person or for that person, so that I can be the ancestor my descendants deserve? That's what Reunion is all about.
beautiful. Perfect sentiment on Juneteenth Day. So thank you, Jerry. Herminia, Jerry, you're going to come back up in a few minutes, but we're going to have Herminia and me speak for a few minutes. And I have to say, as a fawning, fanboy of Herminia, her book, Working Identity, is the best book ever written, truly, on the subject of career change. And it's partly because I love how you look at the perspective of it's more than just a career change, it's an identity transition. So talk a little bit about the premise of the book, if you don't mind, and about the fact that you think that this is something that you're not supposed to analyze it all day long. You're supposed to just start taking steps. And what are those steps? So thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for having me here. It really is a pleasure to be on this fireside chat. So Working Identity, the first edition of Working Identity came out almost 25 years ago. And, it came about in a very accidental way. I was studying, I'm an academic. I study people in leadership roles. I was studying people as they move up in their career paths. And they didn't want to move up anymore. They wanted to move out. And I just kept bumping into this. And so I thought, this is interesting. There's something going on here. I'm going to have a look. And I'll tell you that one of the main things that I found, I am still finding today when I study this, and that is people can tell you really clearly what it is that they no longer want with regard to their work life and even their lives more broadly. But what keeps them stuck there often is they have no clue what they would rather do instead. And so what I set out to find is, how do people actually figure it out? And they really want to figure it out in their heads. They really want to be able to think it through, analyze it, have a personality test, be coached through it, kind of hear. And it's impossible. And it's impossible because past experience can lead you to understanding behavior patterns, but that doesn't necessarily match it up to a job or a role that you can have. And also, because reflection is so much about the past, it doesn't necessarily help you bump into things that you haven't thought about before, that you haven't encountered, that could be actually incredibly fulfilling. And we also do a number on ourselves. We imagine that we'd love to do, there's lots of people who'd love to be coaches. And I've talked to plenty who have tried it out and don't like it. Don't do it well, don't find it rewarding. I'm an author. So many people dream about writing books. I can't tell you the number who've said, I finally tried it. It's really not for me. And so what I discovered, and my secret sauce is, because I'm an academic, I'm into research methodology. So I follow people over time. And so I get to see them at their most confused, which they always forget about. Whenever you ask people retrospectively what happened, you do get a more sanitized, simpler version. The clouds parted and the hand of God came down and said, this is it. And that's really not how it works. It is a process of transition in which you're battling. It's kind of like the old you and the future possible you having a fight. And sometimes you feel very much devoid of any identity at all. You've explained this very well, Chip. Unmoored, in a vacuum, empty. Sometimes you feel a bit too full. There's too many different possibilities, kind of, again, in conflict. Too many avenues to explore, but lost in that process. And the way people figure it out is by doing things as actively as possible, getting out, talking to people, volunteering for things, taking on part-time roles, dabbling, fooling around, flirting with possibilities. And in the course of doing that, they figure it out. This yes, this no. And in the course of doing that, to speak a little bit to what Jerry was talking about, their desire for deeper reflection grows because they start to see some of the clashes, some of the inconsistencies. What is it that's actually holding me back? And it's with greater material for reflection that the deeper thought about where am I really going and what's helping me and what's holding me back happens.
So I know it's not as simple as just go out and try something. What are 3 or 4 tips that you might give for someone who, let's describe the person. There's someone who might come to our workshop that you and I are teaching together in Baja. They're currently in a job that they've been doing for 10 years, but they haven't enjoyed it for the last 5. But they're feeling like they've got to go out and do more research and go out and do more work to figure out what it is, but they realize that they're procrastinating. In fact, today, my my blog. For those of you who don't know, I have a blog. It's MEA blogs on the meawisdom.com site. My blog today was about procrastination. So what are some things you might suggest to that person?
Yeah. Okay. So, many of us actually do have some clues. So one of the things that I do is I ask people to make a list of their possible selves into the future. And the only requirement is that it is as long as divergent and incoherent and inconsistent as possible. There is no, it's the opposite. It's the antithesis to who do you want to be 5 years from now, which is so stressful and so paralyzing for people who are in this kind of state. So make a big list and ideally talk about it with some people. As you start talking to people, you get the benefit of what I call self-reflecting out loud, because you hear yourself talk and you can sense, you get more clarity. You can sense where things are more clear, where they're more confusing. Other people will tell you, gosh, you don't seem very excited about that, or that seems to be something that's really capturing your attention. And so you get a little feedback. You get some clues about next steps. Most of us do have them, but I'll tell you that some people are so stuck that the best thing they can do is just almost pick anything. Sign up, go do something with your professional association, sign up for a volunteer thing in your community, anything that actually gets you out of the immediate circle that you're in. Which only really feeds more of the status quo, gets you meeting with different kinds of people, and just kind of breaks the inertia. One of my students was so eloquent about this recently. He said, you got to find something small and low cost that breaks the inertia. He said, when I'm interested, what am I interested in? All right, I'll buy a book. That's going to cost me at most $20. If I read it, I'm still interested, I'll sign up for a Coursera course. It's still not that expensive, but all of a sudden I'm in a cohort of people who are also interested in this, with whom I can compare notes. And you take one step at a time.
Last question for you before we bring Jerry back. So I may be somebody who wants to make change in my life, and I'm open to starting to iterate, but I'm in a system with family members and friends and coworkers who are all conspiring to have me not change. Exactly. How do you deal with that?
Exactly. First of all, you got to recognize it. And it is so true. This is the most consistent thing that people tell me, how those who are the closest to them think they're crazy to be contemplating moving away from this or doing this other thing that's so unconventional. And so you've got to recognize it. And you also have to recognize it with a bit of empathy, particularly those who are closest, because the thing about being in between, being liminal, being a bit confused, is that confusion kind of spreads to everybody. And those close to you, they want to save you from yourself. They want to keep you from doing something stupid because indeed you are confused. So it's only natural that they would take the more conservative position if you're being a little bit wild and crazy. So be empathetic about that because their life is also at risk. So what I recommend is really getting out into some new networks, getting out to the periphery of your network if you can. And this is why Modern Elder is such a special thing. Find a place where you can congregate with kindred spirits who are also confused, who are also exploring, and who will understand your predicament and be a mirror to yourself. And so that particularly your partner in life doesn't have to carry the whole burden for you.
What a perfect answer. Thank you. Let's bring Jerry back up. And let me just say to both of you, Jerry, you and will be teaching the Reboot workshop about leadership and learning leadership in the art of growing up. We'll be doing it here in Santa Fe. I'm in the library here in the Juniper retreat center here. We have 2 retreat centers on 2,600 acres of land with horses and horseback riding trails and mountain biking trails. It's a great place if you love the outdoors. And of course, if you love Santa Fe. And then Herminia, you and I will be teaching, and we're not teaching in Spanish though. I'm sorry, but we're teaching in Baja in Mexico.
I might.
You might. You came from Cuba. So mi español es muy malo. pero estoy mejorando un poco.
Te voy a ayudar, te voy a ayudar.
Um, so you and I'll be teaching a workshop on working identity, basically a workshop on how to help people through career transitions, and to have the two of you in our two campuses, like, yeah, my mind's blown. This is why I'm doing this for a living. So let's open this up to questions. So if a person has a question, I know there's gonna be a lot of questions, so I want to give adequate time. And there will be some of you who will wait till the last 5 minutes to ask your question, want to ask your question, and you'll be upset because like, guess what? You're at the end of the queue. So if you want to ask a question, go to the reactions button at the bottom and click on that, and you'll see raise hand. And then you're going to raise your hand, and I'm going to call on you. Now, if you want to actually put something in the chat, you're welcome to. But I have a feeling we're going to have enough people asking questions with their hands raised. We may not get to those. So I would say raise your hand. Even if you don't know what you're going to say yet, raise your hand. And you're doing that very well. Okay, let's go to David in Vermont. David.
Hi, Chip.
Great to see you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good to see you. I'm astounded getting to speak to two people whose books have had such an impact on me. I have the same question for both of you. What in the work that you did you learn about bravery that you didn't know before?
David, just to clarify, the two people, there's three of us here. So
I'm sorry. Yeah, great point.
Get it on
I've
me.
met Chip in person. I haven't met you, the other two of you in person. So that's what I was speaking of. Good call out. Thank you.
I'll take a stab and then pass it over. And I'm going to do something that's very Jerry. I'm going to read a poem. And the poem is by Adrienne Rich, and it's called Prospective Immigrants. Please note. Either you will go through this door or you will not go through. Either you will go through this door or you will not go through. If you go through, there is always the risk of remembering your name. Things look at you doubly, and you must look back and let them happen. If you do not go through, it is possible to live worthily. If you do not go through, it is possible to live worthily, to maintain your attitudes, to hold your position, to die bravely. But much will blind you. Much will evade you. At what cost? Who knows? The door itself makes no promises. It is only a door. David, what I learned is that the fear that Chip and Herminia were talking about, I too have had friends and family say, "What are you, crazy? You're giving up this, you're doing this, What I have learned is that more often than not, that fear is their fear. And I want to be clear, there is a certain amount of privilege implicit in what we're talking about. And most of the world does not have the privilege to say, I'd like to do a mid-career transition.
Yeah.
And we need to recognize that. But the important thing, and this is where my internal self-reflection became a very, very helpful thing for me, was to be able to distinguish between what's my fear and what's the fear of those around me. Or as I write about in Reunion, what is the fear of my ancestors, right? I had a client who is a tenured professor at a community college in LA who is transitioning to become a coach and a writer. And all of his ancestors, many of whom were enslaved, kind of scream at him, "What are you, crazy? You have a good job." At least the ones he hears in his head. So Adrian Rich, read poetry. That's what I learned.
Got it.
Thank you.
Herminia.
Right. So here's what your question evoked for me. When people talk about bravery in when it comes to career change, they often think about this kind of a leap, not necessarily into a void, but a leap from A to B. You know, I'm going to take this jump, or I'm just going to jump off and wait. And it's really not that kind of bravery. It's a very different kind. It's almost like a lower key but tougher kind of bravery, which is the one step in front of the other kind. Because you're walking into something that is very open-ended. You don't know how long it's going to take. You don't know exactly where it's going to lead you, but you've got to have faith that you've got to walk away from where you are, essentially. And that's what kind of keeps you going. But you never, there was one wonderful quote. I was trying to remember the writer, something about I can only see, like driving in the dark, I can only see as far as my headlights, but I can get the whole way there that way. But it's scary when you don't know what the destination is, and you have to there's a lot of bravery in just putting one foot after another, and hoping that you'll get to a good place.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
both.
for the great question. Let's go to Maria Angelica.
Hi, everyone. Hi. Thank you so much for this time. I wanted to ask, I don't know if other people empathize, when you're reviewing your options, I continually trip myself up with the notion of money, low earnings, ego, and status. So I have these options, but I'm like, oh gosh, am I gonna just trade off where I am for something else? And I think that is an obstacle for me to start like looking at the options and really kind of getting myself in that kind of mode.
So let's see what, let's start with Herminia this time, and see if she has a thought on that.
Yeah. So one of the reasons why I insist so much on trying to experiment as much as you can with possibilities is that it's such an unfair contest between the thing you already know how to do that maybe you will get headhunted for, that you know you can get a good job with good pay for, versus this nascent thing that you don't know yet if you've got the skills for, you're going to be good at it, what the options are going to be. Usually you don't have similar options to entertain. You've got this one thing that's going to trump everything else because it's got the numbers and the familiarity and everything. And so my advice is, can you hold out? Can you delay a choice? Can you delay commitment until you have more time to explore the other things, until you can do a little bit of compare and contrast? I always remember somebody in one of my studies who it was taking him a long time to get to a viable option that was different, that was what he was looking for. And he always had a headhunter from his old life that kept knocking at the door, and he'd keep going to interview with that person. And each time he said the sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach was so strong that it kind of helped him gather a bit more patience for the other journey. So now that said, we all have, different constraints, food to put on the table and so on. And in some cases, you take a stepping stone. You say, all right, I need that now. But I'm going to carve out a time to keep exploring these other avenues so that I'm not stuck here forever. The key is always to do everything you can to make more vivid, more tangible, more plausible those fuzzy options that can't compete with the old stuff.
Beautiful. Thank you. Jerry, if that, I'm going to keep going if you're okay with that, unless you want to, because I want to get to enough.
Well, I might add one quick thing.
Yep.
I agree with all of that, and I would add that one reframe that has worked really well for me when I have been confronted with that feeling in the pit of my stomach that I have to make this transition is the realization that each transitional state is actually additive. See, there's a piece of me that believes that if I move to a different thing, if I'm going to be a writer, if I'm going to be a published author, I'm going to somehow stop being a coach. And that's just a false structure. The truth is, becoming a writer made me a better coach, just as becoming a coach made me a better whatever I was before, a better father, a better partner, better. So I would just offer that these transitions can be additive to your life, not binary.
Beautiful. It's a great way to notice mindset. You know, one of the key things we focus on at MEA is how do you identify the mindsets that are working against you, whether it's in your career or your personal life or whatever it is. And then how do you do what we did last night here in this retreat for this week, which was the great midlife edit. The first half of our life is about accumulating. The second half of our life is about editing, and learning how to edit mindsets is miraculous. Joan, let's go to you and your friend, Joan and her friend.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. My question concerns a dear family member who has a good job. She's a physician and she has 3 children, and she's responsible for their health insurance. And one of the children has very difficult health problems. She is not liking her job at all, hasn't for a long time. She cannot reconcile leaving the job and still providing for her 3 children. She's the sole provider. Wondering what I might say, you might say to her, please.
Let's have both Jerry and Herminia give an answer to this one briefly. Go ahead, Jerry. Let's start with you.
Well, here again, I think the fear is for safety, right? And in this case, it's the safety of those whom she feels responsible for. And, you know, the coaching trick would be to imagine her children, whom she cares so much about, at her age, faced with the same choice. And what would she want them to choose?
It's so much easier when we're thinking about someone else instead of ourselves.
Absolutely. Yes. Especially when we love that person, right? And you know, to the earlier points, the steps can be small steps. They can be additive in that way. But looking at it from the perspective of your children as adults, what would they have wanted for you? What would you want for them in that moment? Can be really clarifying.
Beautiful.
Wow.
I mean,
Yeah. So I would say, you know, there are times in our lives when it's just too hard to make a change. And sometimes the useful thing to do is to enrich your life outside of the job, and to maybe do what my colleagues call job crafting. Try to find the elements within your job that you find most rewarding or least depleting, and see how much you can play those up. I mean, I remember when I you know, was a mother of a young child and working hard and long commute, I didn't have a lot of bandwidth to get really creative with what else I might do. And rather than beating herself up about it, maybe work with the smaller steps that will kind of enrich the life. So that's the first thing that occurs to me. There are just times when change is not in the cards. It doesn't mean you're stuck there for the rest of your life. The only other thing that occurs to me is are there things that she can do extracurricularly, you know, maybe an online course or, you know, something to help start exploring the possibilities. But it's, you know, I don't see an immediate way to make a shift given what you have described.
got it. Beautiful. Thank you. Douglas, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. So thanks all for this insightful conversation. think I want to take something, Jerry, that you said, and then something you, Chip, said. Jerry, you said that it's a privilege for us to be able to even think about this, right? So all of us on the call today, and the fact that we can even consider a midlife edit or a job change is something that most people in many parts of the world can't even do. And then Chip, I chuckled when you said something like, and there's all kinds of people around us that will conspire against us making that move, whether it's a job move or whether it's some other kind of midlife edit, because they are accustomed to us the way we are. They like that because it is providing stability for them. And then how do you go about having those conversations with your family or whatever that enables you to sort of go off into the unknown, but reassure them that it doesn't mean that their lives are going to get any worse? And by the way, Chip, I'll see you in Baja in a few weeks, and I look forward to that.
Oh, for the Learning to Love Midlife workshop
Yeah,
next.
15th. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Beautiful. All right. Answers from folks.
He
Any
put the
thoughts?
question to you, Chip.
Oh, well, yeah, I don't like to be, okay. Yes. What I would just say is when it comes to those who want you to be who you've always been, I would ask them, would they play that same game for themselves? So my partner in life, Oren, is the exact opposite of me. I'm a risk taker. I love doing workshops. I love being I'm an introvert on some level, but I am very much a very transparent person, including what's happening in my life. Oren's the opposite. So when I want to make change in my life, it affects both of us, and I have to keep him in mind. But one of the things that I've seen over the course of his life is he's a designer who started, designing some hotels with me, and when I was in the hotel business, and I've seen his evolution. And when I could put it in if I could have enough thoughtful time with him, and the key is to have the thoughtful time to have a real conversation, when I can actually help him to see the mirror of his life and how, even though he hasn't necessarily been a risk taker, his skill set, his wisdom, his resume has really evolved with time to the point where he's an exceptional designer now. And when I was able to put it in that context, it helped him to see that I was like this Mustang that could, that needed to be let out to go for a gallop. And that if I wasn't going to be galloping, I was going to be dying. And so that's all I can say is that for me, helping the other person see what they're trying to force you into, how would they feel if they were forced into the same, that's what I would recommend. So thank you for your question.
Thank you.
I'll add a little
go.
bit to that and just say that whenever I go off on an adventure, I will look my wife in her eyes and I will say to her, I am coming home.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you just have to reassure them that you're coming home.
Yeah, that's a great other point, which is sometimes people will see this as the other. They feel like they're the insignificant other, not the significant other, the insignificant other, because you're having an affair with your career or with your ambition or with this new thing you want to do. And I think that's a beautiful statement, Jerry. It's like, I'm coming home. So thank you. Thank you. Let's keep moving because we have a lot of people here. Art Blanchford. Nice to see you.
Hey, good to see you again, Chip, and good to meet you, Jerry and Herminia. Question for you, Jerry. How did you let go of the connection of money and safety? Because I'm sitting right there. Left the big corporate gig a long time ago, doing a lot of other cool things, but still seeing, and not just having money, but actively earning money as safety.
Well, Chip said something just now in his response to Doug about, and Chip, forgive me if I'm projecting, but about the need to make that difference, the need to do the thing. And the thing for me, Art, was if I did not let go of the belief that money was going to keep me safe, the depression was so bad that I was not going to be safe. And
Right.
I
And so
had,
when you let go of that corporate job, you already let go of it. I've let go of the corporate job, but I still have that fear about money being safety.
well, okay, so yeah, it wasn't a switch like overnight, you know. I think Herminia made the point, like it just, the clouds did not part, and then all of a sudden I was no longer afraid of not having enough money. It was, and it continues to be a practice. You know, when I journal in the morning, one of the things I do is I will take inventory of how I'm feeling. And I will write, I am feeling afraid of not having enough money. And then I will have a dialogue with that part of my brain. And then I will, from deep within, this reassuring voice arises. And there was once a really brilliant Seinfeld episode where Jerry realizes he's even Steven. He loses $20 and he finds $20. And every time this fear comes up, I start to remember that funny episode where I realize every time I lose something, something magical comes in. And that's okay. And it's still a lifelong practice. Because those subroutines, those belief systems, boy, I mean, they're multi-generational. They're not just going to flip on a dime because your brain tells you to let go of it. Or some coach has figured out how to reframe things for you. It's just a practice. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
You want to add anything?
You know,
Please.
I think it's also good to ask enough for what. And often that's a question that leads you to enter into conversation with some of the most important people in your life and gets you envisioning possible futures together. And as you make those possible futures concrete, you see, you know, sometimes there is a realistic need for more money. And sometimes it has to do with choices and trade-offs about what is the future that we want and what is the future that we want together. So I'd ask that question.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tracy, Alan, nice to see you.
Yes, good to be here. Thank you. Jerry, I loved your example about the Seinfeld episode. That made me chuckle. A little background to frame my question. So I just resigned from a corporate role after 20 years without another job. I had put in the chat, my dad thought I was crazy. He's like, girl, you're going to be homeless. I'm a single mom. My daughter's in high school, and I'm curious to get advice for someone who maybe is navigating multiple transitions at the same time. So I'm kind of in the messy middle of figuring out what to do next in my career. My daughter will be graduating in 3 years, and then also navigating midlife menopause items. So I'm curious if any of you have advice when you're kind of tapping into all those changes all at once.
We call it, Bruce Feiler calls it a life quake. Let's start with that. And then I'm going to pass it on to the other two. And, you know, he's a faculty member of ours, and his book, Life is in the Transitions, is a beautiful book. Let's see what the two say.
I would just, I'm sorry, go ahead, Herminia.
No, I was going to ask, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I was going to ask, why did you decide to quit without a next idea, an idea about where to go next?
Well, I'll be succinct. It was a 2-year journey. I was in a role that I was just wanting to do more of different things. And within the framework of the job I was in, I didn't have flexibility to do that. And then also I was having some health issues. So I had worked with an executive coach, and she said, Tracy, do you think your body is telling you something? And I realized I come from a privileged place where I was able to do this. So it was all of that combined together.
That really helps, because oftentimes when we leave a role, when we make these kinds of transitions, is because we have to. And sometimes it is precisely the body saying it's going to be harmful if you don't go. So you're precisely in that messy middle. And you can take advantage of that because now you have all the uncertainty, but you have all the time in the world to play with different possibilities. So I would say follow your nose, explore some things, ideally a few things in tandem since you have more time. And that always, for me, that always provides clarity because you can compare and contrast how you feel in maybe something more creative, something less so in different kinds of context, and start exploring and following your nose to what that might be. You've worked with a coach before. It's probably useful to continue that. I would find other people who are similarly in transition, and it's not that hard online to find groups. Sometimes people create their own. You may have other friends who are also going through the menopause and trying to figure out how to do this, or other single mothers. Find kinship and have those conversations within those groups. You know it's going to take a while. You've been in that process for some time, but you've done something amazing, which is you managed to extricate yourself from something that was doing you harm without having to do it. That's incredibly hard. And so now you're on the path and explore.
Yeah. And I hope we'll see you at a workshop, Tracy, because you are right there at the bullseye of the kind of person who comes to MEA. So thank you.
Yes.
We're going to do one last question. I'm so sorry to Angela and Estefania. Estefania, you want my email address? Write me about Colombia. It's chip@chipconley.com. Fudo, thank you. Richard, you dropped off and you came back. So sorry. And then Siva, sorry. Tara, a brief one.
Wow, that was not expecting that. Sorry. So there's a question in the chat actually by Sarah Bolton Howard that I want to elaborate, that I want to bring in because there are those of us in our 50s and 60s who have been let go from our jobs. And so it's sort of a whole new world. Herminia, I really loved what you say about the exploration and really kind of getting out of your head and taking this time to really explore. And yet there's a financial crunch for many of us.
Yeah.
Right. And so how to be able to do that and manage the head. Jerry, I loved what you were talking about with the parts. Like, you know, there's this financier in my head. It's just like, WTF, why are you exploring when you got to find a job? But then there's this other part that I really know.
Tara, I've got to, for the sake of time, I want to give them time to answer briefly.
Sorry,
Herminia.
thank you.
There's nothing to stop you from doing things that bring in income while exploring at the same time. Not easy, but I've seen lots of people do consulting, do advisory, do something on some kind of part-time basis while leaving themselves some time to continue to explore. I would try to find a combination of that.
Great, thank you.
Jerry.
Very briefly, in both this question and the previous question, the one piece that I would encourage everyone to do is to acknowledge the bittersweetness of these transitions. Sometimes in our society, we do not allow enough time for grief, and therefore the transitions, even the transition that I invoke myself, feel stunted. There is a richness to paying attention to the fullness of all the feelings. And that actually creates the ground for the next act, for the next thing that you want to do. So I understand the fear. What am I going to do? How am I going to pay the money, pay the bills? Really important. And pause. Recognize how hard it is. You're a human. You have a fragile heart. Take care of the heart.
And I would add one last thing before we wrap here, and that is an executive recruiter who's really well known in the world said to me, Chip, here's the advice. When I wrote a book called Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder, she said, the piece of advice you need to give people over 50 when they're looking for a job is show up with curiosity and a passionate engagement for what you believe in. And people won't notice your wrinkles, they'll notice your energy.
Mhm.
And so make sure you're in the right space, as Jerry said about your heart, so that you can show up with curiosity and a passionate engagement, and they can see your energy. Because guess what? At the end of the day, that's what we notice in each other. Thanks to everybody. Oh my gosh. These two are going to be teaching with me. Why are you not going to sign up? Look at my blog post today about procrastination. Do not procrastinate. These two workshops will fill up. I love you guys. Thank you. Thank you, Herminia. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, everybody.
The whole team who puts these on. I love the fact that this is an act of generosity for the broader community of MEA, which is global. So I got to go back to class.
Off he goes. Thank you, Chip. Thank you,
Thank
Jerry.
you.
Thank you, Herminia.
Bye.
Thank you all, everyone, for coming. The
Thank
recording
you.
is coming to share with your friends. Thank you, everyone.